In the early days of Israel, the people wanted a king. They looked around at other nations and saw that each had a strong ruler to lead them. They were tired of the judges and of waiting on God's timing. They wanted someone they could see, someone who would lead them into battle. God warned them about the troubles a human king could bring, but the people insisted. Finally, God agreed to give them a king. He chose a man named Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. Saul was tall and handsome. He was taller than anyone else in Israel, and he looked like a true leader. But he came from humble beginnings and a small family. One day, as Saul was looking for his father's lost donkeys, he met the prophet Samuel. Samuel had received a message from God to wait for Saul. When Saul arrived, Samuel poured oil over his head, anointing him as king. Saul was surprised. He never dreamed of being king, but now he was called to lead all of Israel. Samuel told Saul that God would be with him. Something powerful happened that day. Saul was filled with God's Spirit, and it changed him. He was transformed into a strong leader. Soon after, Saul's courage was put to the test. He united the tribes of Israel and led them into battle, winning a big victory against the Ammonites. The people were thrilled with their new king. They celebrated Saul's victory and believed he was the hope Israel had been waiting for. Saul started off well. He was brave and confident, and he won other battles, including those against the Philistines. The people saw Saul as a true leader. He ruled with his son Jonathan by his side, and together they strengthened the kingdom. But as the challenges of ruling grew, Saul's heart began to change. Doubts crept in, and he began to question God's commands. One day, Saul's faith was tested. His army camped at Gilgal, facing a huge Philistine army. Saul's soldiers were scared. They started hiding in caves and running away. They were waiting for Samuel, who was supposed to offer a sacrifice and ask for God's blessing. Samuel had told Saul to wait 7 days for him, but as the 7th day came, Samuel still had not arrived. Saul watched as his army shrank and grew worried they would all leave him. Desperate, Saul took matters into his own hands. He made the sacrifice himself, even though he knew only Samuel was allowed to do it. Just as he finished, Samuel arrived and saw what Saul had done. Samuel was disappointed and told Saul that his actions had cost him God's favor. From that moment on, Saul's fate was decided. He would still be king, but he knew that his disobedience had serious consequences. After this, a young shepherd named David began to rise in popularity among the people of Israel. David became famous for his bravery after defeating the giant Goliath with a simple sling and a stone. Saul welcomed David into his army, and everywhere David went, he won battles. The people loved David, and they sang songs about him. They would say, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Hearing this made Saul feel jealous and angry. David's popularity only grew, and Saul became afraid that David might be the someone else God had chosen to replace him. This jealousy slowly took over Saul's heart and filled him with bitterness. Over time, Saul's jealousy became dangerous. He could no longer see David as a friend or ally. Instead, he saw him as a threat. He even tried to kill David by throwing a spear at him, but David escaped. Even when David had the chance to harm Saul in return, he didn't. David respected Saul as God's anointed king. He wanted no harm to come to Saul, and he continued to show him mercy. But Saul's jealousy and anger blinded him. He began to hunt David, chasing him into the wilderness and sending soldiers after him. David ran, hiding in caves and traveling from place to place, but he still respected Saul and refused to fight back. The difference between them grew clear. While David trusted in God's timing, Saul became obsessed with holding on to power. As Saul grew older, the Philistines gathered again, ready to attack Israel. By this time, Saul was no longer confident. He was terrified and felt abandoned by God. Without Samuel's guidance, since the prophet had passed away, Saul felt completely alone. Desperate and afraid, he did something he had once banned. He put on a disguise and secretly visited a witch in the town of Endor, hoping she could bring back Samuel's spirit to help him. At first, the witch was hesitant, but finally she agreed to summon Samuel's spirit. Soon the faint ghostly figure of Samuel appeared. Saul poured out his worries, telling Samuel how lost he felt, with no guidance from God and the Philistines closing in on him. But Samuel's spirit offered no comfort. Instead, he reminded Saul of his great mistake. Samuel explained that because Saul had failed to obey the Lord's command, God had departed from him. He warned Saul that, as a result, both he and his sons would die in the coming battle. These words struck Saul hard, and he collapsed to the ground in despair. Leaving Endor, Saul felt the crushing weight of his choices and realized he was facing his final days. The next day, Saul's army faced the Philistines in a fierce battle. The enemy was strong, and the Israelites were quickly overwhelmed. Saul's sons, including his beloved son Jonathan, were killed in the fighting. As Saul watched his sons fall, he knew that the end was near. Wounded and desperate, Saul saw the Philistines closing in on him. He didn't want to be captured and humiliated by his enemies, so he asked his armor-bearer to end his life. But the young man couldn't bring himself to kill his king. With no other choice, Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the people of Israel heard of Saul's death, they mourned the loss of their first king. Though Saul had made mistakes, he had once been chosen by God to lead his people. Saul's life is both a story of promise and a warning. He began with great potential as Israel's chosen king, but his choices led to his tragic downfall. His impatience, jealousy, and disobedience cost him everything. Saul's story is a reminder that trusting in God's guidance and following his commands can lead to blessings, while turning away can lead to a painful end.